Home Affairs Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi has revealed that over 13,500 people have been arrested while trying to gain access into South Africa illegally. That statistic is only for the period between the 3rd of January until the 8th of February. The minister spoke to Newsroom Africa's Philani Pakhadi after his assessment of the Limpopo border post in Mpumalanga.
We continue with our coverage today. 20 land border posts have been open for business in South Africa. That includes Beitbridge and Limpopo border post here in Mpumalanga, those are two of the busiest, we'd say, in the country and among the most busiest in Africa, of course. And one assessment was done here in the Limpopo border post by the Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, who joins me now live. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps let's start here. Your immediate impression after your assessment, what is it that you found here?
Well, we came with plans. We drew up plans which we submitted to the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs. We submitted to the National Coronavirus Command Council, chaired by the President, also attended by the Deputy President and all the ministers. We presented also to Cabinet. Now I was coming to see how the plans are operating. And I must say I'm quite happy from what I've seen for the whole morning as I was doing the rounds, that the plans that we have agreed upon on paper are actually on the ground. But at the moment, I must state, it's a Monday. I understand this happens not to be a very busy day. I was told the busiest day starts on Wednesday. That's when maybe our plans will be put to a full test. But for the moment, the tests are on the ground, and I'm very satisfied about that.
Minister, one of the reasons why we saw catastrophe early December, early January was the fact that the testing for COVID was one of the leading barriers that led to a lot of congestion. You had made partnerships with the private sector as well, I would assume, at all-round border posts. What is the relationship here, and how do you plan that it will assist going forward while you still plan for the Border Management Commission?
Well, we analyzed that failure, which you said was a catastrophe. I will say a near catastrophe, really, because no major event took place except that there was congestion. Now we looked at it and we found that the number of people who were testing from Port Health and National Health Laboratory Services were fewer. There were fewer than immigration officials, there were fewer than the police, there were fewer than customs officials from SARS. So we realized that's where the weakness is. And we work towards increasing the number. So if you go and check today, it's no longer only them from National Health Laboratory Service and Port Health. They've been augmented by the South African Military Health Services personnel, and they've also been augmented by private sector. The private sector companies that are working here are working for themselves, but we said come and put up stations so that nobody can come and say, look, I can't test because I don't have a servicing station. So they are here to service. And what we also did, unlike last year or in January, we put up many testing points. Not where people are not going to congregate in one area and be tested. They are dispersed and distributed all over the port area. And I think there are about 4 different stations where they do the testing.
Definitely. And just maybe let's talk a little bit about the borderlines themselves. We do know that perhaps even on a lighter one is that other people say the reason you might not be experiencing an influx here is because people might have got into the country by all means necessary through the borderlines. You've made some arrests there reported to you. Give us those statistics.
Yeah, no, that's true, but I want to argue strongly that the issue of crossing the borderline has always been happening, because we have got the problem of economic migration, economic migrants who unfortunately are documented. It has always been a problem. That's why the government for the past 10 years has been coming up with the issue of Border Management Authority, and after 10 years that bill was passed and we are now starting to implement the Border Management Authority. But the army and the police and immigration officials have been working overtime. We actually moved a lot of immigration officials from inside the country to the border areas from December to help the army. So from the 3rd from the 3rd of January to the 8th of February, they've actually arrested 13,000 528 people who were crossing illegally, and 60% of them were arrested in Mpumalanga, 20% in Limpopo, and the smaller percentages, 6% in KZN, and 10% in the Free State. So you could see that our biggest problem is around Mpumalanga, the border with Mozambique and Eswatini. That's where most of the illegal crossings were found to be taking place within that period of 4 weeks. And that's where most of the arrests were taken, happened. And when they arrest them, they send them back.
Definitely there. Thank you very much for that. And I think you and I will have more time to talk about the Border Management Authority at some point, perhaps even the structure of it and how you envision that it will be able to assist all border posts across the country. That's the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. Thank you for your time. We're here at Limpopo Border Post in Mpumalanga and giving us those statistics that there have been over 13,000 arrests since the 3rd of January until the 8th of February across the country at border posts, with people attempting to enter South Africa illegally.
Now, for more on the reopening of borders and how migrants must be treated, I'm joined now by Wits University's Associate Professor and Director of the African Center for Migration and Society, Professor Joe Vieri. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Prof, and thank you for your time. Perhaps my first question to you is on the back of the figures that we heard Minister Aaron Motsoaledi outlining there, that over 13,528 people were arrested between the 3rd of January and the 8th of February for trying to cross the borders illegally. Could you perhaps talk to us about the infrastructure that exists that actually makes this a possibility for the 13,000 plus who were caught? One can assume that there are many more who do actually slip through the borders without being caught.
I think the most important thing is to recognize the dates that the minister is referring to. We're obviously looking at a period where the land borders were closed, except for very particular situations, which means that the majority of people who would normally be returning to South Africa for work, for education, to rejoin families, were unable to do so. And because individuals are reliant on being in South Africa as part of their own livelihood strategies and continuing to work and contribute in South Africa, individuals found other ways to cross the border, ways that were perhaps irregular. So it's important we look at those numbers in that context. The other thing is that when we're looking at the numbers, it would be helpful to better understand when the minister refers to people being arrested, but then talks to people being returned. There are various legal procedures that either were or weren't followed in those cases, so it would be helpful to better understand that. But really, we're looking at a region where we know that people can struggle to enter and cross South Africa or into other countries through regular routes due to the demands on individuals to provide certain, it's very challenging for individuals to regularize their stay. We have a very restrictive immigration policy and one that is really contrary to any principle of the free movement of people within the SADC region.
And how does one, Professor, actually balance that free movement of people, the strong, stern immigration policies that you speak of, and I guess a country's obligation to, preserve itself internally, make sure that there are enough resources for its own people, that it's able to take care of its own constituency before allowing migrants in? How does one balance that?
I think we have to start from the fact that this is a difficult and dangerous rhetoric around sort of gambling the position of a citizen against a non-citizen. And we know in many cases this is an unhelpful way of framing issues around immigration. We are part of a region and part of a country that has long established histories of migration and mobility. This is linked to both movement for work and the importance that migrant labour plays within the South African space and the South African economy. Linked to that, there is no evidence to suggest that the presence of nationals from other countries is displacing South Africans from work, for example, or from public services. evidence is in fact to the contrary, where we see that foreign nationals, particularly from neighboring countries within SADC, who are in South Africa are contributing to the economy, they are filling jobs that South Africans are often unwilling to take. And we know that the contribution these individuals make to the tax base is very substantial. We need to look at the ways in which foreign labor is also creating jobs for South African citizens. So whilst of course there is a need to find ways to manage the movement of people effectively and respectfully, we have to recognize why it is that we need to be delivering a more respectful, a more coherent and a more carefully managed border management policy.
And how does one, Professor, then change that narrative, the one that we're speaking around now, where South African citizens are not necessarily pitching citizens against non-citizens, but are actually able to see the value of immigrants coming into the country and their contribution to our economy?
I mean, unfortunately, we are living in a world, this isn't unique to South Africa, where issues around nationalism, issues around racism and xenophobia are increasing. And we see the ways in which these forms of othering, these forms of ways of claiming certain social positions are being increasingly used by political leadership. They're increasingly used in ways that can scapegoat their own failures in terms of failures of state initiatives to, for example, create more jobs or improve social welfare provision. So what we're seeing is a rhetoric, is a way of framing issues being pushed by our political leadership, by political spokespeople, which then trickles down into the ways in which community leadership will often frame these issues. And then obviously that's within our wider public space. So work that has been ongoing around trying to address these tensions is really struggling. And increasingly we're seeing the difficulties that are faced at a community level in trying to encourage individuals to view this in a different way. Are often undermined by that very prevalent rhetoric that we hear from people in positions of power who should be far more responsible in the ways in which they are discussing issues of movement and population mobility. And whilst I think reporting within the media has improved dramatically over the last few years, we're aware that there are also situations where there can be sort of moral panics that become big headlines and ways to attract further attention that are not based on fact, but create good stories.
Coming back to the issue of the reopening of the borders now, when Beitbridge border closed, it was at the time described as a humanitarian crisis, the congestion that was experienced there. How does one basically humanize the entire process, especially with the reopening of the borders? How does a human-centric approach to immigration and border control look like during the season of COVID-19?
I mean, as you say, it's about ensuring a humane response and people-centered. And I think that's a really important way of framing the way in which the ambitions of safe border management should be being considered. So, for example, the minister recognizing the humanitarian crisis that we were seeing on the Messina side of the Beitbridge border before the Christmas period really was a recognition that the way in which things are being managed is not human-centric and is not effective. So we obviously, in the context of the COVID pandemic, need to ensure that our borders are managed in an effective and a safe way. We need to ensure that everybody has access to appropriate screening processes. We need to potentially think very carefully about what it means to be demanding negative PCR tests, their effectiveness in this context linked to cost, and concerns about whether that will push people to cross in different ways. What does it mean if somebody has challenges in accessing at a formal border post to cross safely, and the decisions that they may make in order to move in other ways? We know that the way the systems have been put in place now suggests that, for example, there'll be a limit on the length of which trucks can queue, and after that, trucks would be redirected to rest stops. But in reality, as a truck driver, you're under pressure to keep moving. You don't have the time to sit and wait. So what is that going to mean? Are we going to see the borders open 24 hours to try and manage the increased time it's taking people to cross the border, or are we going to continue to work within the South African curfew period?
Professor, we'll have to
unfortunately,
Professor, we'll have to leave it at that. Unfortunately, time not on our side, but thank you so much